No one noticed the poor woman standing near the arrivals gate at the airport, except the little girl who tugged at her sleeve and looked up with wide, searching eyes and asked in a soft, innocent voice, "Are you lost too, mister?" Words that were not meant for her, but for the tall, pale man standing a few steps away, silent and still, like a shadow that refused to move. A man no one dared approach, a man who was not human at all, though no one there knew it yet. The woman's name was Eliza, and she had learned long ago how to disappear in crowded places like airports, how to lower her gaze, how to make herself small so security guards, impatient travelers, and polished officials would look past her as if she were part of the floor. She wore an old coat, a little too thin for the cold air conditioning, and held the hand of the little girl Lena, whose mother she was caring for temporarily after a long illness, a favor she had taken without payment, because kindness for Eliza was something she gave even when she had nothing left. People brushed past them, some sighing loudly, others muttering about blocking the way, one man even snapping that she should move along if she couldn't afford to be here. And Eliza apologized instinctively, even though she had done nothing wrong. Lena, however, did not apologize. Lena stared openly at the tall stranger in black, her head tilted slightly, as if she could see something no one else could. And that was when she spoke again, louder this time. "You look lonely," she said, and the man's red eyes flickered for just a fraction of a second. The vampire king ruler of the undying court, feared across centuries, hidden behind human illusion, had crossed continents without emotion, but those simple words struck him with a force sharper than any blade. He had come to the airport for reasons of power and secrecy, to watch unseen, to protect his bloodline from afar. Yet now his attention was locked not on enemies or threats, but on a fragile human woman who was shielding a child with her body as security raised their voices. "Ma'am, you can't sit here," a guard barked, eyeing Eliza's worn shoes and a small bag at her feet. "We're waiting for someone," Eliza said quietly, pulling Lena closer when the guard's tone sharpened. "You've been waiting too long," another officer added, suspicion creeping in. The familiar judgment she had known all her life, the judgment reserved for women who looked poor, tired, and alone. Lena clutched Eliza's coat and whispered, "It's okay, Auntie. I'm not scared." And that word Auntie sent something ancient and dangerous stirring in the vampire king's chest, because his own children had used that word once, long ago, before the world had hardened him into a ruler of night. The guards stepped closer, their hands hovering near their radios, and Eliza felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her throat. But she straightened anyway, placing herself fully between Lena and the men, her voice shaking but firm as she said, "Please don't scare her. She's just a child." From the shadows behind the glass walls, unseen by all but Lena, the vampire king watched, testing himself, resisting the urge to bend the world to his will, because there was something sacred in what he was witnessing, a human with no power choosing courage anyway. Lena turned her head once more toward him, smiled as if greeting an old friend, and waved, her small fingers glowing faintly for a heartbeat before fading, a glow the king recognized instantly as ancient and impossible. His breath caught. This child was not ordinary, and the woman protecting her was doing so without knowing the danger, without knowing that hunters, rivals, and ancient laws were already circling. The guards were suddenly called away by a disturbance elsewhere, their attention snapping aside, and the tension dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Eliza exhaled, knees weak, unaware that the air itself had shifted because the vampire king had allowed it. As she gathered her bag and guided Lena toward a quieter corner, she never noticed the tall man fall into step behind them at a distance, his presence invisible, yet absolute, his gaze fixed on the woman who had just reminded him of something he had buried centuries ago. That true strength was not fear, nor power, nor immortality, but standing between a child and a cruel world, even when no one was watching. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with thunder or crowns. It begins when kindness is tested in silence, and someone powerful chooses to see it. Eliza thought the worst was over once the guards walked away, but airports had a way of turning small misunderstandings into quiet humiliations. And as she guided Lena toward a row of empty seats near a charging station, a sharply dressed airport supervisor stopped them with a polite smile that carried no warmth, her eyes flicking down to Eliza's worn coat and the child's scuffed shoes before she spoke. "Miss, we've had reports that you've been loitering," the woman said smoothly, loud enough for nearby travelers to hear, and Eliza felt heat rush to her face as a few curious glances turned their way. "We're waiting for a connecting flight," Eliza replied softly, showing the printed boarding pass she had folded and unfolded so many times the paper was thin. The supervisor barely glanced at it. "This area is for ticketed passengers only," she said, even though Eliza was one, and Lena squeezed Eliza's hand tighter, sensing the shift in tone. "She didn't do anything wrong," Lena said suddenly, her small voice clear and steady, and the supervisor blinked, clearly not expecting defiance from a child. "Sweetheart, let the adults talk," the woman replied, her smile tightening. Around them, people pretended not to watch, yet Eliza could feel their judgment pressing in, the familiar assumption that someone like her must be causing trouble. She knelt slightly to Lena's level and whispered, "It's okay," even though it wasn't, because fear had taught her long ago that calm obedience was safer than protest. From across the terminal, unseen and unheard, the vampire king felt something dark coil inside him, not rage, but something sharper, more personal, because humiliation was a language he had once used to rule, and now he was watching it used against someone who did not deserve it. He extended a fraction of his will, not enough to draw attention, not enough to reveal himself, just enough to tilt chance in Eliza's favor. A sudden call crackled through the supervisor's radio, her posture stiffening as she listened, annoyance flashing across her face. "Excuse me," she muttered, stepping aside to respond, and the pressure around Eliza loosened like a knot finally untied. "Come on," Eliza murmured, guiding Lena away before the woman could return, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. They found a quieter corner near a large window overlooking the runway, planes gliding in like silver birds against the darkening sky, and Lena climbed onto the seat, swinging her legs as if nothing had happened. "Why was she mad at you?" Lena asked, brow furrowed in honest confusion. Eliza hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Sometimes people think being poor means being dangerous," she said, choosing truth without bitterness. Lena considered this, then leaned her head against Eliza's arm. "That's silly," she said. "You're nice." Those words, so simple, landed heavier than any insult Eliza had swallowed that day, and she blinked back tears, unaware that the vampire king was listening, every syllable etching itself into a heart that had not softened in centuries. As Eliza dug into her bag, she realized Lena hadn't eaten since morning, and she pulled out the last granola bar she had saved, breaking it in half without hesitation and handing the larger piece to the child. "You'll be hungry later," Lena protested, trying to give it back. "I'll be fine," Eliza said automatically, a lie she told easily, because sacrifice had become second nature. Lena took the bar, but didn't eat right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath, words that sounded old musical, not quite, fitting the modern world, and for a brief moment the air around them felt warmer, steadier, as if the noise of the terminal faded. The vampire king stiffened. He knew that language. It was older than airports, older than cities, spoken only in halls of stone and blood, long buried beneath time. The child finished whispering and smiled, handing half her piece back to Eliza. "Now it's fair," she said, and Eliza laughed softly, accepting it without understanding why her chest suddenly felt lighter. Not far away, two men watched from behind a column, their eyes too sharp, their stillness too deliberate, hunters who knew how to blend in, who had scented something unusual the moment Lena spoke. The vampire king sensed them instantly, a low warning hum in his bones, and he shifted his position subtly, placing himself between the hunters and the woman without them ever seeing him. One of the men frowned, scanning the area, then shook his head. "Nothing," he muttered, and they moved on, unaware of how close they had come. Eliza felt a shiver she couldn't explain and pulled Lena closer, staring out at the plains as if searching for reassurance in their steady movement. She did not see the tall man pause behind the glass, his reflection briefly visible, eyes no longer cold, but conflicted, because for the first time in centuries, protecting from the shadows was no longer enough. Watching Eliza share her last food, stand her ground without anger, and comfort a child who was not even her own, had stirred something dangerous inside him, a desire not just to observe, but to intervene, to step forward, to change the path he had set in stone. And as Lena looked up once more, directly at where he stood, and smiled as if she knew he was there, the vampire king realized this was no accident, and that kindness, once seen, could never be unseen. Sometimes protection begins long before the truth is revealed, when unseen forces choose to stand closer than fate intended. Eliza did not notice the three strange children at first, because exhaustion had a way of narrowing her world to whatever was directly in front of her. But Lena noticed them immediately, her small body going still as her gaze locked onto the figures standing near the far end of the terminal, half hidden by a row of vending machines, watching with a stillness that did not belong in a place full of rushing people. They were close in age to one another, two girls and a boy pale-haired and unnaturally composed, dressed in dark old-fashioned clothes that looked far too elegant for an airport bench. And yet they seemed just as ignored as Eliza often felt passed by without a second glance, as if the world had collectively decided not to see them. "Auntie," Lena whispered, tugging Eliza's sleeve. "They're hungry." And Eliza followed her gaze confusion, flickering across her face, because the children did not look distressed, did not beg or cry, or ask for help yet. There was something in their eyes that reminded her of long nights when she herself had been hungry and too proud or too tired to say it aloud. She hesitated only a moment before standing, smoothing her coat and reaching into her bag to check what little she had left. Another granola bar, a small bottle of juice, hardly a meal but enough to share. And Lena beamed as if Eliza had already made the right choice. As they approached, the smallest boy stepped forward, instinctively placing himself slightly in front of the two girls, his silver-gray eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made Eliza's breath catch, because no child should look that alert, that ready. "Hello," Eliza said gently, lowering herself to their level. "Are you waiting for someone?" The tallest girl inclined her head with a grace that felt rehearsed, ceremonial. "We are waiting," she said, her voice calm but oddly formal, as if she were translating thoughts that did not belong to this century. Lena smiled brightly and held out the granola bar. "You can have this," she said. "We can share." The three children exchanged a look, silent and rapid, and then the girl nodded once. "That would be acceptable," she replied, and Eliza felt a strange ache in her chest at the choice of word. They sat together on a row of seats, Lena happily breaking the bar into careful pieces while Eliza passed around the juice, apologizing unnecessarily for how little it was, and the children accepted. Everything with a reverence that made the simple act of eating feel important, almost sacred. From the shadowed edge of the terminal, the vampire king watched the scene unfold, his attention split between the woman who gave without hesitation and the three children, who were not strangers to him at all, but his own blood, his heirs who had slipped their guards to follow the pull of something they did not fully understand. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with fear he rarely allowed himself to feel, because the world beyond his protection was full of hunters who listened for moments exactly like this. As if summoned by the thought, a presence shifted nearby, subtle but wrong. A man leaning against a pillar with a phone in his hand and eyes that never quite stopped moving. The scent of iron and old prayers clinging to him like smoke. The hunter had felt it, the ancient whisper when Lena had spoken earlier. The echo of power hidden in a child's breath, and now his gaze brushed over the gathered children, lingering just a second too long. Eliza sensed the change in the air before she understood it, a tightness creeping up her spine, and she instinctively pulled Lina closer, her body angling protectively without conscious thought. "Are you okay?" Eliza asked the pale-haired girl softly. "You look cold." The girl's eyes flicked briefly toward the pillar, then back to Eliza. "We are concerned," she said carefully. "There are those who notice what should remain unseen." Lena frowned. "That man?" she whispered, pointing openly, and Eliza gently lowered her hand. "It's not polite to point," she murmured, though her heart was racing now. The hunter smiled faintly, as if amused, and began to move closer, each step unhurried, confident. Before Eliza could decide what to do, the vampire king shifted the balance of the world again, not with force, but with presence, stepping into a line of sight that bent attention away from the group like water around stone. The hunter slowed, frowned, and turned abruptly, distracted by a sound only he could hear, and then he was gone, swallowed by the flow of travelers, as if he had never been there. The children exhaled in near unison, tension draining from their small frames, and the boy finally relaxed his stance, sitting back down. Eliza laughed nervously, trying to dispel the heaviness. "Airports are strange places," she said. "Too many people, too many stories crossing at once." The tallest girl studied her for a long moment, luminous eyes thoughtful. "You did not ask who we are," she said, "or why we are alone." Eliza shrugged gently. "You didn't ask why we are either," she replied. "Sometimes people just need food and a place to sit." Something like wonder crossed the girl's face, fleeting but real, and from the shadows, the vampire king felt a crack form in the walls he had built around his heart, because the woman he had been watching did not know she was standing at the center of ancient danger, and yet she chose kindness anyway. As an announcement echoed through the terminal, calling Lena's connecting flight, Eliza stood brushing crumbs from her hands, unaware that the simple act of feeding 3 ignored children had just drawn her deeper into a world of blood crowns and hidden laws, and that the hunter who had turned away would not forget her face. Sometimes fate tightens its grip, not with violence, but with a quiet choice that cannot be undone. The moment Eliza stood to gather their things after the announcement echoed through the terminal, she felt it again, that tightening in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath, and this time it did not fade when she looked away, because danger, once noticed, rarely retreats so easily. Lena clung to her hand as they moved toward the exit, the 3 pale children walking close on their other side without being asked, their steps quiet, synchronized, as if they had done this many times before. And Eliza realized with a start that she had not questioned it at all, had simply accepted their presence, the same way she accepted the weight of responsibility in her life, instinctively and without complaint. Outside the glass doors, night had fallen fully, rain streaking the pavement in silver lines under harsh airport lights, and the parking structure loomed like a concrete maze where shadows gathered too thickly to feel natural. "Stay close," Eliza said softly, adjusting Lena's hood, though she could not explain why her voice trembled. The children obeyed instantly, the smallest boy positioning himself slightly behind Eliza now, as if the roles had subtly shifted. Footsteps echoed behind them, slow, deliberate, not rushed like travelers, not distracted, and Eliza's heart stuttered as she glanced over her shoulder to see the man from earlier step out from between 2 parked cars, his smile gone, his eyes sharp and hungry in a way that made her stomach turn. "You dropped this," he called, holding up nothing at all, and Eliza knew then that this was not a misunderstanding, that whatever he wanted had nothing to do with lost items or polite conversation. She tightened her grip on Lena and took a step back instinctively, placing herself squarely between the man and the children. "We don't want any trouble," Eliza said, forcing calm into her voice. "Please leave us alone." The man laughed softly, a sound that did not match the situation. "Oh, I don't want you," he said lightly. Not exactly. The air seemed to thicken as two more figures emerged from the shadows, their movements wrong in a way. Eliza could not quite describe Lynn's a little too long smiles, a little too sharp, and Lena whimpered, pressing her face into Eliza's coat. The three pale children went rigid, fear flashing across their composed expressions, and the tallest girl whispered urgently, "You should not have stayed." Eliza felt fear flood her veins, but she did not move aside, did not step back, even as every instinct screamed at her to run, because the thought of leaving the children exposed was unbearable. "Run," she told them instead, her voice breaking. "Go, I'll slow them down." The words had barely left her mouth when the world changed. A pressure swept through the parking structure, heavy and absolute, as if an invisible boundary had slammed into place, and the shadows recoiled, the men stumbling back as the lights flickered violently overhead. The Vampire King stepped forward at last, no longer hidden, no longer observing from a distance, his presence unfolding like night itself, tall and still and terrible, eyes glowing red, not with rage, but with cold authority. The hunters froze, recognition dawning too late. "This ground is claimed," the king said quietly, and his voice carried weight older than law. One of the men dropped to his knees without understanding why, another scrambling backward in panic, and the leader, the one who had smiled, looked up with horror etched into his face. "You broke the old laws," he whispered. "You revealed yourself." The Vampire King's gaze flicked briefly to Eliza, to the way she shielded Lena and the other children with her body even now, trembling but unbroken, and something like resolve settled over him. "I corrected an imbalance," he replied, and with a single subtle gesture, the shadows surged forward not to harm Eliza or the children, but to bind the hunters, dragging them back into the darkness from which they had crawled, their screams muffled and fading until only rain and the hum of lights remained. Silence fell, thick and unreal. Eliza stood frozen, breath coming in short gasps, trying to understand how the man in front of her could feel both terrifying and strangely safe at the same time. The children moved immediately, clustering around the Vampire King, the smallest boy gripping his coat, the girls standing close, relief softening their fear, and Eliza realized then what she had suspected, but never allowed herself to say aloud. This was their father. The king turned his gaze to her fully, and Eliza had to fight the urge to look away, because there was no cruelty there, no judgment, only a depth of attention that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "You should have fled," he said, not unkindly. Eliza swallowed, her voice shaking but honest. "So should they?" she replied. Someone had to stay. For a long moment, the world seemed to wait, rain tapping softly against concrete, engines humming in the distance. And then the Vampire King inclined his head, just slightly, in a gesture that felt like respect. "Come," he said at last. "This place will not remain safe." He did not reach for her, did not command, only stepped aside, allowing her to choose, and Eliza felt the weight of that choice settle into her bones as she took Lena's hand and walked forward, unaware that she had just crossed from an ordinary life into a fate bound by ancient power and quiet courage. Sometimes safety is not found by running away, but by standing firm until the night itself steps forward to protect what is kind. Eliza followed the Vampire King in stunned silence as he led them away from the parking structure and into a private service corridor that felt older than the airport itself, its walls humming faintly as if remembering secrets no human blueprint had ever recorded. And with every step, her fear slowly transformed into something heavier and more confusing truth. Lena walked calmly now, as if the terror outside had never touched her. her small hand warm and steady in Eliza's, while the three pale children stayed close to the man they clearly belonged to, their earlier composure replaced with quiet relief, and it was impossible to ignore the way they watched him with a mixture of reverence and longing that spoke of distance more than neglect. Finally, when they reached a secluded waiting room sealed off from the rest of the terminal, the Vampire King stopped and turned, his posture still formal, but no longer distant, and Eliza felt the full weight of his presence settle over her, not crushing, not threatening, but undeniable. "You deserve to understand what you stepped into," he said evenly, and Eliza nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "Those men were hunters," he continued. "They track what does not belong to their world. And you chose to stand in front of my children without knowing what they were." Eliza looked down at the three pale faces turned toward her, at the way Lina leaned instinctively against her side, and something fierce rose in her chest. "They were scared," she said simply. That was enough. The Vampire King studied her as if she were a rare phenomenon, something that defied the logic he had ruled by for centuries. And for the first time, his voice softened. "They are my heirs," he said quietly, "born of my blood, bound to a court that would shape them into rulers before letting them be children." The smallest boy stepped forward then, his voice small but clear. "She fed us," he said, looking at his father. "She did not ask for payment." The word struck harder than any accusation, and Eliza felt a strange flush of emotion, because she realized she was being weighed not as a subject, not as a pawn, but as a person. "I didn't do anything special," she said, embarrassed. I couldn't ignore them." The Vampire King turned his gaze fully on her, red eyes searching, and Eliza braced herself for judgment, but it never came. "Instead," he said, "you did what many powerful beings fail to do. You saw without calculating." Silence stretched, thick with things unsaid, and then Eliza found herself doing something she had never done before with anyone powerful. She spoke back. "With respect," she said, meeting his eyes despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Watching from the shadows isn't the same as protecting them. Children don't need a king looking from far away. They need someone to show up." The air seemed to freeze, the children going still, Lena's fingers tightening in Eliza's hand, and for a heartbeat, Eliza wondered if she had crossed an unforgivable line. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Vampire King did not react with anger. He closed his eyes briefly, as if the truth had landed somewhere it had been trying to reach for a very long time. "That is why they are drawn to you," he said quietly. "And why the old laws stirred when you spoke." Eliza frowned. "What laws?" she asked. The eldest girl stepped forward, her voice gentle but heavy. "There are ancient bindings," she said. "When a human protects royal blood without knowledge or reward, something awakens. A bond." Eliza's breath caught as she remembered the warmth, the strange moments of calm, the way fear had recoiled around her earlier. "I didn't agree to anything," she whispered. The Vampire King met her gaze steadily. "You agreed with your actions," he said, not accusing, simply stating fact. "But bonds do not mean chains." He lowered himself then, not kneeling in submission, but lowering his height so he was no longer towering over her, and the gesture alone sent a ripple through Eliza's chest. "I will not force you into my world," he continued. "But know this, those hunters will return. And now that they have seen you, you are no longer invisible." Eliza felt fear spark again, sharp and real, but beneath it was something else, something steadier. She looked at Lena, at the three children, at the man who ruled the night, yet stood before her waiting, not commanding. "Then I won't pretend any more," she said quietly. "If danger follows them, I won't look away." The Vampire King's expression shifted then, not into a smile, but into something deeper respect earned, not demanded. "Then you will not stand alone," he said, and in that moment, Eliza understood that this was not the beginning of a romance built on fantasy, but of a bond forged through choice courage and the refusal to let kindness be small. Sometimes the most powerful truths are spoken by the weakest voices, and once heard, even kings can never return to silence. The hunters did return, just as the vampire king had warned, but this time they did not come quietly or cautiously, because fear makes desperate creatures reckless, and desperation made them believe they could take what had already been claimed by courage and truth. Eliza sensed it before anyone spoke, a pressure in the air as the sealed waiting room trembled faintly, lights dimming as shadows gathered like storm clouds pressed against glass, and Lena stirred beside her, whispering softly in that ancient tone that no longer frightened Eliza, because she understood now that it was not darkness speaking through the child, but something older and protective. The vampire king stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the approaching danger without a word, his presence expanding until the room itself seemed to bow, and the three pale children stood behind him, no longer afraid, their small hands glowing faintly as if responding to his strength and Eliza's unwavering calm. When the doors burst open, the hunters did not hide their hatred or their intent, chanting laws long broken, accusing the king of weakness, accusing Eliza of corruption, calling her a sacrifice that would restore balance. And Eliza felt Lena's grip tighten, but she did not step back, did not lower her eyes, because something within her had finally hardened into certainty. "She is under my protection," the vampire king said, his voice steady and final, and when the lead hunter laughed and lunged forward, the king did not roar or strike in rage. Instead, he raised one hand, and the world answered, shadows folding inward like obedient servants, binding the attackers where they stood, stripping them of movement, of power, of voice. The children watched in silence, not in fear, but in awe, and Eliza realized this was justice, not cruelty consequences finally catching up to those who preyed on the vulnerable. One hunter fell to his knees, pleading, spitting venomous words about humans being beneath ancient blood, and Eliza surprised herself by stepping forward, her voice trembling but strong. "You're wrong," she said. "Power doesn't come from what you are. It comes from what you protect." The vampire king turned to her slowly, something profound passing through his expression, and with a final gesture, the hunters were removed from the world of night entirely, vanished beyond return. Their threat ended not in spectacle, but in silence. When it was over, the air eased, the lights steadied, and the waiting room felt ordinary again. But Eliza knew nothing would ever truly be ordinary after this. The children rushed to her then, wrapping their arms around her waist, their gratitude wordless but overwhelming, and Lina laughed softly, the sound cutting through the aftermath like light through fog. The vampire king approached Eliza once more, not as a ruler addressing a subject, but as a man acknowledging an equal, and he spoke carefully, as if every word mattered. "You were never meant to be invisible," he said. "Your kindness changed the path of my bloodline. My children have learned something my court never taught, what it means to be protected without fear." Eliza swallowed, emotion swelling in her chest. "They deserve that," she replied simply. "Every child does." The king nodded, then did something no one had ever seen him do before. He bowed his head, not deeply, not theatrically, but sincerely, and in that moment, Eliza understood that whatever bond had formed between them was not built on crowns or immortality, but on mutual recognition. "I will not take you from your world," he said, "but my world will always stand beside you now. If you choose to walk away, you may. If you choose to stay, you will be honored not as a servant, not as a prize, but as family." Eliza looked at Lena, at the three children who had already claimed a place in her heart, and felt no fear at the choice before her, only clarity. "I won't disappear again," she said. "For them? Or for myself?" The vampire king's gaze softened, something warm flickering behind the red that had once terrified her, and he extended his hand, not demanding, not binding, simply offering, and when Eliza placed her hand in his, The world did not shake, but something quieter and stronger settled into place. A future shaped by respect, protection, and slow-growing trust. As dawn began to creep across the horizon beyond the airport windows, the children watched the light with wonder, safe and unafraid. And Eliza knew that justice had not come as punishment alone, but as transformation. Never judge the one who stands quietly in the shadows, because sometimes the weakest-looking heart is the one that teaches even a king how to love, protect, and change. Now,